Hi, my name is Emily Angelotti. I'm from Troop 1745, and this is my Gold Award project. For my project, I established a garden at Barrow Circle Community Center, which is in a low-income neighborhood, and I taught the children who attend the center how to garden. So the first week that I came, I started with a little pre-assessment to gauge how much the children already knew about gardening. They had a lot of trouble recognizing the different plants and tools used to garden, and they vaguely knew the process of gardening, but they didn't have any concrete knowledge. So I started out by teaching them the basics, that plants need water, sunlight, and room to grow, and that we need to take care of the garden every week to make sure that the plants grow healthy and that we can have the vegetables from them. We planted squash, cucumbers, several herbs including basil and cilantro, and then also tomatoes. Everything was from seeds except for the tomato plants. We used saplings. And then we also had a stepping stone activity. I wanted to include something artsy and kind of exciting to make sure that the kids were engaged in my project. So I got plaster of Paris and we poured it into molds. If you don't have any molds, then you can just use Tupperware containers, the circular ones, and those work fine. And then the children put little mosaic pieces and marbles into them to decorate them with their own designs. So these were a couple of the stepping stones that the kids made. And the following week, we took them out of their molds and placed them in the garden. And the idea was that this way the kids would step on the stepping stones instead of on the plants, so that way we could keep the plants nice and healthy and not trample them. We also played a little game called Mission Impossible, where the kids had to get to the other side of the garden by only stepping on the stepping stones, so they weren't allowed to touch the dirt or else they were out. And that was a lot of fun, and it kept the kids active too. So the following week, we also learned about weeding. I printed out pictures from the internet of the saplings of the plants that we had planted, and then also common weeds in my area. So you can go online and find the weeds that are most common in wherever you live and print out those pictures and bring them. You can kind of do a real life I Spy, so you show them the picture and they have to try to find the plant that looks the most like that in your garden. So that's a really good way to teach them to discern from the vegetables that we're growing and then the weeds that we want to pull out. We also decorated baseball hats. I tried to come up with something artsy almost every single week. And so you just buy some white baseball hats from Michael's or your local craft store and some puffy paint, and they can decorate those. It kind of promotes staying healthy in the sun, making sure you're wearing sunscreen, and you've got something protecting your face. You can see that some of our seeds had started to sprout. That was pretty exciting for the kids. And then the tomatoes did very well because we started with the saplings. The following week, I had a weeding competition because that seemed to be the kids' least favorite part of the day, was when it was time to weed the garden. It wasn't very exciting for them. So I came up with a little competition, who could find the most weeds. I gave them each a brown paper bag and they went around the garden finding weeds, but they had to check with me first before they pulled anything out of the ground. And this is key because otherwise they might accidentally pull out something that you're trying to grow. We also watered the garden, and then we made pinecone bird feeders. So to make the bird feeders, you take peanut butter and you spread them on pine cones, which you can just find in the woods. You don't need to go out and buy them. And then you dip the pine cones into seed mix. So you can buy seed mix from a store or you can make your own. I made mine with stale crackers and breadcrumbs and also sunflower seeds, and that saved a little bit of money. And then after you cover the pine cones and the peanut butter and the seeds, you wrap string around them, and then we hung ours around the garden. We had a little fence that we hung them on, and that stopped the birds from eating our plants. Instead, they ate the pine cones. The following week, I had another weeding competition, who can find the biggest weed, and then we watered the garden again. I decided to mix things up a little bit. Instead of doing a craft, I had some field games. So if you've ever played octopus tag, weed tag is basically the same thing but with a different name. So one person starts out as the person who's it, and then when they tag other people, they have to hold hands or link arms and run around and tag the other people. So it kind of shows that a weed starts out small, but then it grows and it becomes a bigger and bigger problem and something that's harder to defeat. And then we also did a plant processes relay race. So first they ran with seed packets, and then construction paper that was shaped like the sun, and then watering cans, which we filled up with water, so that was a fun little wet activity too. They enjoyed that. And then shovels because you have to weed. So while these games were active, they also tried to teach something about gardening. I tried to make them a little bit educational at least. So this is more garden progress. It came along very nicely, and you can see the tomatoes have trellises. If you don't want to go out and buy wire trellises, you can also use long sticks that you find in the woods and kind of prop those up by the plants, and that works very well too. The following week, we had another weeding competition. The first one to fill up the bag wins, but I did not use the big brown paper bags. I used smaller bags because there aren't that many weeds in our garden. And then to make watering the garden a little bit more exciting, we used a sprinkler to water the garden. So instead of just using a traditional can, the kids can run through the sprinkler and then also water the garden. And then we played a game called Headbands. You'll see in the next slide. So kids wear these little headbands, and there's a place to stick a card, and so everyone else can see the card, but the person who has the card on their head cannot see it. And so they have to ask questions to try to figure out like what object or animal they were. So I made my own cards that were different gardening items and also the plants that we were growing. So they became more familiar with the plants while playing a fun game. So you can see we have our first tomatoes. The kids were really excited when this happened. They wanted to pull them out and eat them right away. But I told them that they would taste a lot better if we waited until they ripened. But still, it was a very cool moment for the kids to see their hard work pay off because they've been weeding this garden for so long, and now they finally had tangible evidence that it was working. So I would say this project was definitely a success, but there are a couple things I wish I could go back and change if I did it again. I would make sure to plant the seeds earlier in the spring because we planted them a little bit late, so we didn't have anything to harvest until late August. So you can look up online and find the dates that you're supposed to have different seeds planted, and that would have helped me a lot. Another thing to keep in mind is just try to keep the kids engaged. They'll get bored if you're just weeding the garden all the time, so you need to come up with arts and crafts and active activities to make sure that they are excited about what you're doing. Be prepared to get dirty, especially with younger children. They'll just kind of throw dirt everywhere, so wear old clothes and old sneakers, and make sure to remind the kids to do the same. I had one girl who showed up in a pretty pink skirt one day, and she did not want to weed the garden, and I don't blame her. So make sure that the kids are prepared for the activities that they're going to be doing. Another thing is to check the weeds before anyone digs them up. I mentioned this earlier, but it's really important that the kids don't pull up saplings instead of weeds. And then also, this will help with making sure that all the weeds are actually weeds, is you keep the number of people in the garden limited. So only allow a couple of kids in, especially if it's a small space like mine was. You want to make sure that there aren't too many people who are all running around, because then the garden can get trampled. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your own garden.